Hello, and welcome to another in our Race in America series on Washington Post Live. I'm Jerry Brewer, a sports columnist here at the Post. My guest today goes by many names. Some like to call him CP3, others go with the point guide. Now he can add author to the list. Joining me today to talk about his new book, 61, is NBA All-Star Chris Paul. Chris, welcome to Washington Post Live.
Jerry, what's happening? Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
I'm really looking forward to this, man. Let's get right to it. Let's talk about your grandfather, Nathaniel Jones. He's the inspiration for the book, all the lessons that he and his family taught you. Why is now the time to share your story?
Well, it's funny. My grandfather was everything to me, to my family, and I lost him when I was 17. And you just never know when the right time is to tell a story. I definitely knew that right after the story happened, um, after the tragedy and losing my grandfather, um, I wouldn't have been as reflective as I am now. Even 5 years ago, I wouldn't have been as reflective as I am now. But now, having kids of my own that are 14 and 10, it really gave me an interesting perspective of how important that relationship was with my grandfather and all the things that I learned from him day in and day out just by watching him.
Chris, I wanted to talk about who you collaborated with this book with, Michael Wilbon, former Post columnist,
Yep.
ESPN commentator. As a matter of fact, I have the same extension at the Washington Post that Wilbon had for 30 years. Uh, I think about that every day, just kind of the sense of responsibility and keeping the tradition going. What was it like to work with Wilbon? How did he bring out your voice as an author?
Man, it was unbelievable, and I've known Mike since I was in college. Actually, probably since I was in high school. So I remember when he was with the Post, and when I set out to write this book, I knew that I was still playing or whatnot, and I knew that I was going to need someone to help me at least craft how to write it and what it was going to look like. And I couldn't think of anybody that I respected more than Mike, than Wilbon, and he was just amazing. And I sat in his office during the pandemic and had conversation after conversation with him just so that he could hear my story, me and my brother. And it was an unbelievable process. And I couldn't imagine working with anybody other than Mike.
Let's talk about who this book is dedicated to, Papa Chili. You give a very humorous and vivid description of him with grease on his hands from the auto shop and his
All the
thick
time.
Southern drawl. But what also stood out to me was when you said, and I'll quote you here, he thought it was a blessing to be a blessing. How did he live that out?
Yeah, so it was a unique relationship with my granddad. While he worked hard and he taught us all these lessons, he was a fun person to be around. Man, just seeing that picture of him right there gives me goosebumps, man, because he just knew how to balance it. He knew how to make us work for things, but then he also knew how to show us love and console us when needed to. And him saying that it's a blessing to be a blessing was his way of basically saying, when you meet somebody and you be like, "How you doing?" and they be like, "I'm above ground." You just glad to be alive and being able to be in a situation where you can help others.
And North Carolina is a different kind of South from like Tennessee, where I was born, and I was raised in Kentucky. But a lot of these lines from the book, it just kind of reminds me of Black Southern talk. But I
Yep.
wanted to talk to you about Papa Chili, and he wasn't satisfied with renting. Why was it important for him to own his own service shop, Jones Chevron?
Yeah, so when you're a kid, you don't really know anything. You just know what you're taught and what you see. And for me, showing up at my granddad's service station, that was just he was working, and that picture right there is from my granddad's Golf that I didn't even get a chance to experience. It was always the Chevron um, when I was born. But the story behind that Golf was my grandfather wanted that land, and the white man that owned that land said he wouldn't sell it to a black man. And so that's why my grandfather went up the street to you know, the Chevron that he ended up having was probably about 5 to 10 minutes away from that Gulf. That Gulf is actually maybe 2 or 3 minutes away from Winston-Salem State University. And so my grandfather just went further up the street, sort of closer to my grandmother's house, and made his stand there with the Chevron.
Chris, how did he influence you as what you've become as a businessman? I mean, you have a production company, you're a smart investor. Just how much of that does that go back to your grandfather?
I was 17 when my grandfather was murdered. And so I didn't know what to feel or what to know then. I didn't know anything about business. I didn't know much about anything. I knew about, church, basketball, and my family. And so it's crazy the way that life works that as I started getting older and getting into the NBA and getting into business, the things that my grandfather taught me over those 17 years started to come into play, right? The ownership aspect. And my parents started teaching me things because when you're a kid, sometimes they don't give you all the information. So, uh, excuse me, my grandfather's will to just never take no for an answer, to always be hardworking, to always be thoughtful. Um, I think that's how he's had a impactful, meaning in all the different things that I've tried to do business wise.
Chris, I wanted to read a passage from 61 that stood out to me. Of course, I've always wanted to be explosive down the lane and dunk on everybody. Who wouldn't? But I've learned from Papa to be scrappy, to use my perceived disadvantage as an advantage. How do I find the edge on guys without using physicality? I'm not necessarily tall for an NBA player, but I learned early on to be creative and to know how to pass, score, and win using whatever methods I could. I think the game. When I think about you, I think about there's the charming Chris Paul, and then there's the relentless competitor on the court. How much did Papa's example really influence the way that you play?
Yeah, I think Papa influenced the way that I play, and just he never he never gave us shortcuts, right? He just never gave us shortcuts. I think my brother played a huge role in the way that I play and my mentality, but my grandfather, it was just in any and everything, there was no shortcut. So, I mean, I'm 8 years old and I'm out in the driveway at the service station trying to figure out how to open the hood of a car. And all cars are different. Some cars are different as far as where they put the hood and where the stand is going to be to hold the hood up. But if I was out there struggling, my grandfather wouldn't just do it for me. He would sort of make me figure it out, and that's just the all. That's just the way it's always been my entire life. Is there's no shortcuts, and you got to work for whatever you get.
Chris, let's talk about why this book is called 61. Um, your grandfather was murdered, as you have referenced, by five teens in 2002. I think that was just one day after you had committed to play for Wake Forest.
Yep.
Several days later, you play the first game of your senior year of high school. But before we talk about that 61 point tribute, we have a clip. Let's take a look.
His total left him just 6 points away from the state record for most points in a game. But as he walked to the foul line, that didn't matter. 61 did.
I walked to the free throw line, the referee gave me the ball and shot an air ball right out of bounds. And my coach took me out I just looked at my dad and started crying.
It's like everything came out of him. He just walked over to me and gave me a hug, and he just fell in my arms, and that's when it just tore me up, because of what he had just done.
Chris, what message were you trying to send by scoring 61 points that day?
Man, that's wild. That still give me goosebumps seeing my family over there. I think I was just trying to um, send a message to my grandfather. You know what I mean? To let him know how much we missed him, how much we loved him, and it being the day after the funeral, all of my family. If you look up, if you could see up in the stands, all of my family from all up north, all my family from up in DC, Upper Marlboro, all that area had came down for the funeral, and they all stayed for the game. So I think for me, it was just about, you know, showing gratitude for my grandfather and what he'd done for our family, and I wanted to do that with all of us there.
Chris, let's talk about race and parenting. We're both Black fathers. In the book, you talk so much about how, because of being an NBA player and so forth, your kids have been able to have a certain privilege, but you also talk about them having to navigate what you call the realities of the divide in this country. What have you taught them about how to navigate America?
Yeah, I think it's a constant conversation. Me and my wife are constantly having conversations with my kids day in and day out because things are sort of always changing. But one thing that's a constant is always going to be their skin color, right? And so, as I talk about in the book, when the tragic incident happened with George Floyd, we had real conversations with our kids, and we always trying to, tell them about how to move and how to do this and how to do that. And it's an unbelievable feeling, I tell you, to be a parent. It's like one of the coolest but most important jobs that you have, because you realize that you learn so much from your parents. And we don't parent the same way that our parents did, but there are bits and pieces that you take away. There's this that you may take away, but you also have to understand that times change. Like, we don't have a yard where my son or my daughter has to get up and cut the grass every day. So there's other ways that we have to build in these different responsibilities to show them what the work looks like, and about being grateful and being thankful. But most of all, we have two amazing kids who I love to death, and just try to give them real life experiences to show them what life is going to be like one day when they get out of mom and daddy's house.
You showed them the entire George Floyd video.
Yes,
Why
sir.
did why did you and your wife make that choice?
Yeah, we made that choice because um, we feel like as parents, a lot of times people try to shelter their kids from different situations, right? But instead of sheltering them, we want to, talk to them and communicate them about the realities that's out there. And so in showing them, uh, my daughter, like I said, I'll never forget it. She was crying and she was like, "Is this going to happen to Chris?" But if you don't have these conversations with your kids and then they run into a situation where maybe they are pulled over or they're somewhere and they don't understand how they're viewed or how they're looked at, then um, they may do something that, causes a crazy reaction that, you regret for the rest of your life. So just trying to educate them on things that's going on.
Tell me about your work with the Chris Paul Foundation and the ways that you're trying to level the playing field for disenfranchised communities.
Yeah, so through our Chris Paul Family Foundation, um, we started years ago, but we made this huge transition. One year, we were visiting schools, and me and my wife was walking through the school, and we saw all these smart boards and iPads and all these different things. And all I could do walking through there was thinking about, the kids on the other side of town who weren't having access to all of this technology and things that are improving classrooms. So what we did was we started going into the inner cities, and we went to boys and girls clubs and uh, State Farm was actually a huge partner in doing this in a few different cities, but we wanted to start putting learning labs, learning centers in these different underserved communities. And it's been really cool. It's been really cool. And also through our foundation, we have a thing called Club 61. And obviously, because of the book now, everyone understands why 61 is so important. But through Club 61, we bring 5 kids from every NBA city that I played in, and we bring them out to LA and we take them to Goldman Sachs and talk to them about financial literacy. We do health and wellness with them. We do morning yoga. We do all these different things just to try to make sure that they understand that people really do care about their well-being.
Chris, you've had one incredible calendar year, and we're not even talking about where you're going to play next season. But I think people forget you graduated in December. You start at Wake Forest, but you graduate with a degree from Winston-Salem State University. Why was it important for you to graduate from an HBCU?
It was important for me to graduate first and foremost because I went to college back in 2003 and went to the NBA in 2005. So I had worked on my degree already to begin with because uh, just completion. I wanted to get my degree. And during the pandemic, but before the pandemic, myself, along with Courtney Mays, who works with me, we really started trying to champion Black designers, right? Which sort of also happened where we started wearing all these different HBCU paraphernalia, whether it was hoodies, shirts, and all this. So it was actually cool for me because I grew up around a lot of different HBCUs. I think there's 12 HBCUs in North Carolina. And so a lot of different HBCUs started reaching out saying, wear this, wear that. So what it did was it gave me an opportunity to educate myself on other HBCUs. And then in the process during the pandemic, when I said, you know what, let me go back to school and get my degree, as much as I've been trying to do for HBCUs, why not graduate from one? Just so happens Winston-Salem State University is an HBCU in my hometown, and I enrolled. And December 16th, uh, 2022, 2022. Yep, I graduated.
Let's get into a little bit of basketball here, man. You've had an eventful off season already, and it hasn't even gotten started.
Eventful
Um,
week.
uh, you're headed to the Golden State Warriors. That's been reported. I'm not even sure in the NBA dynamics of it all if that trade is official. But what I'm more curious about is what's left for you in the NBA besides the obvious. Like we know you'd like to win a championship, but what's your why? I mean, 38 years old, be 39 by the end of next year. What's your why for continuing to play?
Just the competitive drive and the fact that I love it. I love it. I get to wake up every day and say that I play basketball as my way of life. And so um, I'm grateful that I get a chance to play at a high level. And I've just always been a believer in, like, why does your age have to say that you're done? Right. And so that's my why, what I mean, to compete and to play. There's no joy like being out on that court competing. And so I want to continue to compete for a championship.
Chris, to be such a superstar, now that you play deep into your 30s, you start to lose a little bit of that influence on picking exactly where you get to play. But every place that you've been able to make this immediate impact. Uh, why is that? And do you see that continuing?
Definitely see it continuing. But why is that? I don't know. I honestly don't know. I just hoop. I play, and I think when I get to a team, wherever it may be, I'm just I just sort of always try to pride myself on being selfless and understanding that whatever the team needs and whatever we need to do to win, I'm gonna try to do. It's not always gonna work out like that, but I always know that no matter what situation I go into, that I'm coming from the right place.
Charles Barkley has always called you the greatest leader in the NBA currently. How do you view leadership? And I mean, you're not afraid of conflict, and never will be. Yet, I think the people who have played with you definitely have seen the benefit, even though it's not always been buddy buddy.
Yeah, the older I've gotten, I realize the importance of hard conversations, and I've been like that for a while. And even playing on the court, I'm extremely competitive. But I've said it over and over again. I'll never ask a teammate to do something I wouldn't do myself. And leadership is hard. Leadership is hard because you're actually the person who a lot of times have to make decisions, and you can't be on one side or the other. At some point you got to make a decision, but um, leadership is forever changing, evolving, because in order to lead, you got to be able to follow. So, yep.
You're about to play with another cast of characters that you've gone head to head with and had some intense battles with. That's nothing new in your career. Uh, how does it's just kind of comical to us who watch the game, just that these rivalries turn into teammates. How do you
Hmm.
manage those relationships, and what do you think? What do you think this new uh, adventure is going to be like?
Yeah, it's definitely gonna be a little different putting on that uniform for the first time. But what's wild is you understand how nice it is to be around like-minded guys. You know what I mean? Those guys over there, they've done it. They've won multiple championships together, and so I think just just getting in there to see how I can help, um, be a part of that piece. Be a part of that puzzle. I'm excited about it.
Chris, you shared a story about your grandfather and how he cared for a Vietnam veteran who had PTSD. Um, how did that inspire you to prioritize healthcare for retired players when you were president of the Players Association?
Um, Man, so it's crazy. His name's Happy, and my dad actually just seen Happy at the barbershop last week. I was somewhere, and my dad sent me a text. He was like, "Guess what? Happy just walked in here into the barbershop." And like I said, I was a kid, never knowing how that stuff would come full circle. Um, but just seeing the way my granddad cared for him meant a lot. Because being kids, me and my brother thought everything was funny. Like, oh, why does he look like that? What is that? And to see how my grandfather cared for him, really is something that stuck with me for a long time and always has. And so when we had an opportunity to get health care for all the retired players, it was a no-brainer. It was a no-brainer because I've said over and over again, the one thing that we all as players have in common is that one day we will all be retired players. So understanding how you take care of those who took care of you is important.
Chris, when you look at the history of the league, players of your size don't play 18, 19, 20 years, don't play into their late 30s. What's been the key to longevity for you? What advice would you give to younger players who want to play as long as you have?
Man, while it's always the joke of, oh, you ain't won. I think the cool part about the longevity aspect is it's a bunch of different things, honestly, is making sure that you keep the main thing, making sure that you putting in the work day in and day out. You got to have really, really good people around you and understand that it's not just you, but it's hard. I never act like it's easy. It's hard. It's getting up when you're on vacation, right? With your family and still getting up at 6 a.m., going to the gym and doing the workouts. It's sacrificing a lot. It's missing a lot, So um, there's a lot that goes into it. So I would never want somebody to think that it's the easiest thing ever. But um, like I said, um, this is my job. Like playing basketball. I went to the gym and shot shot this morning with my son, and that was work. So I'll never complain about that.
What at 38, what do you think is the hardest thing in terms of maintaining your body?
Um, Man, the hardest thing. I don't know. It's probably just the off season, because there's not really an off season. So on days you're managing. Uh, this morning I was in the gym lifting at 6 a.m. Then I got done with my lift, got in the car, drove my daughter to volleyball camp. Then I went to the gym, got some shots up with my son. Now I'm here. Then my son has workouts at 2. So I think, the hardest thing at this point isn't like the body or basketball and all that. It's just trying to make sure I'm giving time to the people that I love, especially my kids.
Chris, as we close, something that you recently said that very much sounded like classic you, vintage you. You said you'd love for somebody who hates you to read your book. Why?
Yep. Um, because I'm one of those people that I'm open to all different perspectives, right? And guess what? I'm not naive enough to think that everybody likes me or loves me, but it's almost like when you do a blind taste, right? And you eat something that you probably would have never ate, and then you're like, oh, I really like this. I'm just curious. I'm always very curious to see if someone could read the book with an open mind if they didn't like me. I've heard from family members, I've heard from friends, whatnot. So just just curious.
The book is called 61. It's a raw portrayal of you and your family and your grandfather in particular. Unfortunately, we're out of time, so we'll have to leave it there. Chris Paul, thank you for joining Washington Post Live.
Jerry, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate this.
And thanks to all of you for watching. To check out what interviews we have coming up, please visit WashingtonPostLive.com to register and find out more information. I'm Jerry Brewer, and thank you for joining Washington Post Live.